Hi, my name is Gabriel, originating from a serene village. Allow me to share with you a bone-chilling tale that unfolded not too long ago. About 5 months back, I found myself behind the wheel on the highway when my car suddenly lost control and veered into the path of oncoming traffic. I got hurt a little in the accident, but my car got really messed up, and I accidentally hit a fancy car too. The person who owned the fancy car gave me a bill for fixing it and for feeling upset about the accident. I couldn't afford to pay so much money, and I told them right away. But then, the people in that car attacked me, grabbed all my documents, and then sped away. I figured it wouldn't be wise to involve the law, so I began pondering on how to come up with the money by the deadline set by that group. I didn't have anything valuable. No country house, no apartment, and now no car. I lived in a dormitory because I hadn't been back to my village in 7 years. I relied on the hope that my mother could sell her cattle to assist me. So I made my way back to the village, seeking a solution to my predicament. At first, I briefly considered not going back to the city, perhaps settling down in the village and vanishing from sight. But I quickly understood that this wouldn't solve anything. They could easily track my village registration through my passport, which would only worsen the situation. Upon returning to my village, I was astonished by how much had changed during my 7-year absence. My mother had aged noticeably, her health deteriorated, and she hadn't tended to any livestock for quite some time due to the absence of someone to store hay. Her farm had fallen into disarray, and there was no mention of any possibility of a loan. I felt overwhelmed by the realization that there seemed to be no escape from my predicament. Our home was deteriorating, and instead of food in the cupboard, there was a stack of my mother's medicines. I kept my misfortune from her, fearing to burden her further. She would often clutch her heart, expressing that now that she had finally laid eyes on me, she could peacefully depart. "I prayed to God to let me live until I see you, my son," she would say. These words deeply troubled me, prompting me to reassure my mother that everything was all right and she need not worry, as she busied herself frying potatoes and exchanging village news. It was evident that life in our village was challenging for everyone, except the Pedros mainly. Because Pedro's son often traveled abroad, they seemed to possess everything, gadgets, and anything their hearts desired. They even have access to clean, running water. Currently, the Pedros family is away, and Thiago hasn't returned from his trip. I've taken on the responsibility of watching over their house. Their wealth is evident. Yet, in our small village, who would dare to steal from us? The younger generation has migrated to the city, while the elderly remain in our village. Our living conditions are modest, with electricity being a rarity. We strive to accomplish tasks during daylight hours, as productivity diminishes in the evening when darkness falls. I heeded my mother's words, but Pedro's wealth stunned me, lingering in my thoughts. It had already captured my imagination. As my mother spoke, I realized their house was currently unoccupied. I pondered, that's where I can find some money, and the idea stuck with me incessantly. Nightfall descended swiftly in our village. I mentioned to my mother that I wished to take a stroll, but she had already dozed off, unaware of my words. Silently, I shut the door behind me and made my way towards Pedro's house. Their imposing lock dangled from the door, conspicuous even from a distance. Without hesitation, I unlatched it and entered. After tinkering with the lock, I managed to remove it along with the latch. Stepping into the house, a peculiar sensation washed over me, as if someone had recently occupied the room. Driven by curiosity, I flicked on a lighter. only to be startled by the presence of an elderly woman standing directly before me. Her hands were folded over her chest, and her eyes were shut tight. If it weren't for her upright posture, I would have mistaken her for being asleep. Startled, I jerked and ended up bruising my shoulder badly. I sprinted through the village in a frenzy as though I were soaring. The barks of nearby dogs seemed to blend with my own, creating an eerie chorus that echoed through the village, reminiscent of a wild wolf on the hunt. It was only upon reaching my yard that I finally caught my breath, allowing myself a moment to contemplate who might be inside the Pedro's house, despite the locked door. Seeking solace, I made my way to the kitchen and settled down at the table to ponder further. Mother entered the room inquiring if I was in pain and why I hadn't gone to bed. Choosing to disregard her inquiry, I instead questioned her about the inhabitants of the Pedro's residence. "Nobody," came my mother's response. The elderly woman passed away a month ago, and we laid her to rest without Thiago presence, as he's currently on a sea voyage. The entire village gathered to pay their respects at the Snaketail's funeral. I mentioned earlier in the morning that their house was shut. As a gesture of goodwill, I watch over their yard out of friendship. However, you seemed preoccupied and lost in your own thoughts, oblivious to my words. You've become quite secretive, perhaps influenced by the allure of city life, where everyone seems to fare better. People depart the village with joy in their hearts, but often return with a sense of gloom hanging over them. It's sad reality. Meanwhile, my mother, shuffling around the kitchen, eventually retired to her room and drifted off to sleep once more. Guided by an inexplicable force, I found myself drawn back to the Pedro's house. With the old lady deceased and Thiago still absent, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The absence of the lock on the door only heightened my anticipation, and I knew I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. As I stepped into the Pedro's house once more, a sudden chill gripped me, freezing me in place. I was petrified by what lay before me. The same elderly woman stood motionless in the center of the room, her presence sending shivers down my spine. She stood there, crossing her arms over her chest and shutting her eyes. My heart raced with fear. Despite my instincts urging me to flee, I realized I had no choice but to confront the situation. I needed to secure the money for the damaged car, and there was no alternative route available to me. Minutes dragged on, and we remained locked in a silent standoff, resembling two statues frozen in time. Summoning all my courage, I tentatively advanced towards the chest of drawers I had spotted in the dim light. To my astonishment, the old lady mirrored my movements, stepping forward in unison with me. With each step I took, she mirrored my movement in perfect sync. As I reached for the drawer, I consciously averted my gaze from the apparition, reminding myself that fear should be reserved for the living, not the dead. I reassured myself that my mind had conjured up the image of the old woman. Suddenly, an icy and weighty hand gripped my shoulder. My knees weakened, as if burdened with sacks of grain. I found myself frozen in place, unable to move an inch. I sensed that something dreadful was unfolding, something beyond explanation, and denying its reality was futile. Fear crept in as I pondered the possibility of my demise. A chill swept over me as my body temperature plummeted. Perhaps it was fear causing my blood pressure to drop, or maybe it was the chilling touch of the deceased's hand. Overwhelmed, tears welled up in my eyes, cascading down my cheeks uncontrollably. It had been ages since I last cried like this. While children typically cry out about their physical discomforts, my tears were not for any ailment. Instead, I lamented the possibility of being harmed for the sake of money and a car that was damaged through no fault of my own, but due to a random pothole. My distress was evident as I sobbed and lamented my situation. Expressing my concern for my mother, I conveyed my fear that her well-being would suffer if I were to meet harm. With these words, the apparition began to withdraw, gradually fading away until it disappeared entirely. It felt as though the apparition had granted me permission to search the house for whatever I could find. After scouring for about an hour, I stumbled upon a stack of dollars hidden beneath the bedspread. With the discovery in hand, I closed the door behind me. I quickly descended from the porch and hurried back home. The next morning, I set off for the city, assuring my mother that I would be back soon. I dialed the phone number left by the owner of the crashed car. I reached out to inform him about finding the money, but a woman answered the phone, informing me that her husband had passed away recently. Upon realizing I was calling about the documents, she kindly provided her address, and I promptly went to retrieve them. When I attempted to offer her the money, she refused to accept it, uttering the phrase, "Perhaps God truly punished him for his sins. Some might deem me crazy." However, I decided to return the money to Pedro's and placed it back where I found it, hidden beneath the bedspread. Afterward, I secured the latch and ensured the barn lock was properly in place. Only I am aware that in addition to this lock, in the Pedro's house, there exists a far more dependable invisible guardian until Thiago returns from his voyage. Let's hope we never have to endure such an ordeal again. In the aftermath of his haunting encounter, Gabriel found solace in the lessons learned. Through the harrowing experience, he gleaned the profound importance of honesty, empathy, and community. Returning the stolen money and securing the Pedro family's home, he discovered that true wealth lies not in material possessions, but in integrity and compassion. Gabriel's journey serves as a poignant reminder that even in the darkest of times, embracing these virtues can lead to redemption and renewal, illuminating a path towards hope and resilience.